Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we're kind of in the midst of Swords of X, right? This great big huge 22-part series. And one of the things that I realized is that we never really finished up X-Force, right? So we're going to kind of run through X-Force really quick today, finish volume 1, and then run through volume 2, and then kind of continue on with Swords of X. And with some of the series like Wolverine, for example, Wolverine picks up with Swords of X with issue number 6. So when we get around to that point, we're just going to cover the first 6 issues, kind of call it a day. The whole idea here with this X-Force comic is in the first couple issues, we had this scenario where Xavier was killed, if you guys remember that, right? Xavier was taken out, and it was just by some individuals who managed to infiltrate Krakoa, right? So we're kind of going a little far back, right? We're going towards really the end of last year and the beginning of this year, right? So we're a little behind on this. I would say we're probably about 10 months behind on this. The idea here is that with these guys having breached, the notion behind this is that first, they're trying to figure out who these guys belong to, and then 2, how they managed to get in, right? That's kind of the continuing talking point that's going on in this little bit of a story. But what they end up doing is kind of teleporting to a particular location, at least traveling there by way of one of the Krakoan gates, and then using a kind of mind sketch to a degree, right? Which basically they take Sage with them. Sage, of course, having what's essentially a computer for a brain, but it allows Jean Grey to use her telepathy to kind of analyze the digital imprint that was left there and to kind of figure out, kind of retrace these steps of these guys, right? To kind of follow them from the point when they arrived on Krakoa and sort of trace their steps back, right? Trace them back to an eventual location. Now, this ultimately leads to the Quiet Council itself meeting and then kind of discussing and asking, like, what do we do here? That when it comes to this strike that was launched on the X-Men, that what it looked like is it was designed for the purpose of accessing their computer systems and basically acquiring or taking their wealth, right? That seemed to be the goal that was going on. It seemed to more or less be a heist. And that's kind of the question is, why would they launch that attack, right? Like, why launch a heist against Krakoa? If they're looking for information or they're looking for resources, whatever the case happens to be. Now, you had a lot of pharmaceutical companies and a lot of companies that were basically, owning governments, essentially, that didn't really want to innovate. But with X-Men popping up and the mutant population creating pharmaceuticals that were basically outshining anything that the rest of the pharmaceutical companies in the world could produce, then in turn, it was like, okay, well, let's try to sabotage them or steal their technology, right? And that's kind of where they are at the moment. It's kind of like, okay, these guys are implementing a heist. These guys are trying to take what we have. What do we do here? Now, Xavier takes more of an approach in saying that this is something very similar to like the 12 labors of Hercules, right? In the sense that we as the mutant population were Hercules in his early years, meaning he remained in hiding. He was afraid that people would try to come after him or something along those lines. But when he learned his true goal, when he learned his true purpose, the son of Zeus, when he learned what he was really about, then in turn, he stepped out there into the world and started undergoing the 12 labors and became the Hercules that we know today. And Xavier kind of takes that sort of scenario and applies it to themselves and says, for years and years and years, mutant kind was hiding. We tried to stay out of the limelight. We tried to stay away from conflict. We tried to move away from those things. It ultimately led to us basically falling victim, right? We were still being chased. We were still being hounded. We just believed if we took the peaceful approach that we could somehow talk them into believing in a better thing. But the issue that you have here, this is what's so interesting about Xavier's philosophy now. The fact that you don't believe that guns are okay doesn't change the fact that a person standing at you or standing in front of you with a gun pointed to your face, right? Like, they're going to pull the trigger. So what are you going to do? The days of trying to use words and talk people into believing what you believe and to try to get them to understand, those days are gone. That now it's the X-Men and really it's the mutant population's job to either drag humanity into the light or leave humanity to its fate and just let it suffer and conquer the world, right? Like, just kind of take things over, say, if you can't lead this world into a better place, then we will. And that's when he kind of says, what we need here is a team that basically is going to serve as the intelligence arm of the X-Men. With that being the case, they in turn say, we're going to reconstitute X-Force. And X-Force is going to basically be our CIA type team, right? They're going to be our intelligence gathering apparatus. The first thing they do is they go to visit Forge, right? And Forge is, again, the guy who makes weapons, all kinds of arms and armament technology and suits of armor, things like that. And they basically hit him up and say, like, we need your help in developing weapons. What he's been doing here is he's been taking Krakoan biology, right? So pieces of Krakoa and then basically hybridizing it, which is to say blending it with weapons technology. And what he's kind of done here is he's actually created a kind of device that bonds itself to the hand, and it can do any number of things. It can shoot energy, right? It can turn itself into like knives and stabbing weapons. It's a pretty powerful piece of technology. The other thing that was going on here is that somehow, and we don't really really know how, but somehow Krakoa got its hands on adamantium in a liquid state. Now, the reason why I say this is a big thing is because it's very difficult to do. The formula for adamantium isn't readily available. Somehow they managed to get their hands on it, but the idea is that if they ever have to bring Wolverine back, they can bond adamantium to his skeleton. But this is kind of a big deal because what it also means is that if there are other mutants out there that have the ability to heal, right? They have healing factors, you could bond adamantium to them if they're willing to undergo the process, right? So it's actually a really awesome concept. But one of the first things they do is they basically kind of have this mission they go on to a place called the Point, or at least it's kind of a reference for where Beast is operating out of. But they end up realizing that this location, this kind of strike that's taking place, with regards to this heist that's going on, is a chance for them to basically track these guys down and find out why it is they track Krakoa, why they attack Krakoa in the first place, right? And so what you have here is basically a place where you've got human allies, right? They're basically called, Xavier scholars. So people who study the philosophies of Xavier, his views, and just kind of see what merit there is, but they're not enemies of the X-Men, right? They're just trying to understand the mutant population. Of course, with this heist showing up and with them having, different Krakoan, bits of Krakoan technology at their disposal, you end up having them basically break into this place, kind of reach the Krakoan gate, and then shut the gate down just as X-Force is getting in. And it leads to Domino basically kind of bailing out, right? Her not really experiencing any kind of a shut or anything like that. But with the gate shutting off the way that it does, it cuts Wolverine in half and it kills Quentin Quire. But the whole thing behind this is that with the gate basically shut down and no real means to access this facility outside of getting into an actual vessel and flying there, right? So however long that happens to take, you end up having Black Tom Cassidy hit up by Domino, and then Black Tom Cassidy, of course, talks to Gateway and says, like, we need you to teleport Domino to a location. Now, the other part of this, and kind of a plot thread that's beginning here, and is going to sort of pick up later on in the next story that we do, is that Domino's actually losing her power over luck. That's kind of the nature of Domino, is that she can kind of bend luck to her favor, right? So if Domino's walking along a whole bunch of slot machines, her power will tell her, play that slot machine and you'll win $1 million, right? I mean, it won't say like you'll win $1 million, but it'll just kind of pull her towards that slot machine, and then she'll play it, and then she'll win like $50 million in progressive slots, right? Which nobody ever does. But the other part of this is that with her arriving there, of course, she's also met by the arrival of Forge, right? Forge is like, look, I'm not like sitting this one out, right? Like I got all these arms and all this technology and something like that. I want to destroy stuff, man. I'm tired of sitting in the lab. That's basically the whole stance of Forge. Now, once they get in here, kind of jumping back to this facility, of course, Wolverine being cut in half immediately still starts killing people. But one of the guys ends up turning their gun on Wolverine, kind of spraying him down, and at the moment he kind of looks to be dead, right? But that, of course, gives time for Domino alongside Forge to show up here, right? Now, once these two show up, Domino uses her technology, which actually proves to be highly effective, and then, of course, Forge using his suit, and just kind of showing up here. You got a few guys who kind of show up, try to launch an attack. They're all subdued pretty quickly. Domino's a little harsh on him, but the funny thing about this from Beast is he's like, look, okay, these are the only guys that we have that can give us information on the original heist, right? They are the only ones that all kind of work together, or at least know what was going on with that heist. So don't kill them. Like, you can beat the crap out of them if you want to, brutalize them all you want to, but don't kill them. And when it looks like Domino's going to, that's when Beast steps in and says, you have to stop. The whole purpose of X-Force is to serve as an intelligence gathering apparatus. We can't gather intelligence if the people with that intelligence are dead. You have to save at least one of them. The other cool thing that kind of happens here is Forge actually ends up grabbing Wolverine's pieces and just kind of smashing them back together, and it's like, now heal yourself, right? Like, now heal back up because we need you out here. And so what you end up getting here is once it's all kind of said and done, right? Once you have the mission more or less proving to be successful, the other guys have basically retreated, they've aborted. You have Domino who walks up on one of the guys with the intention of looking to kill him, right? The whole kind of device she has on her arm basically creates, something that looks like Wolverine's claws. It's not really adamantium, but something similar to it, a pretty durable material. And it looks like she's going to kill him. And that's when Beast is kind of like, you have to stop here, right? And it's a truly fearful thing. One of the other things that we kind of found out in their various investigations is that one of the things this kind of secretive organization had been doing was basically removing pieces of Domino, right? That's what was going on with her in the first two issues and why she looks so scarred. They had been cutting off pieces of her and then basically seemingly to attach them to like what looked like assassin robots or something like that, right? These kind of hybrid beings. But in her mind, she looks at this guy and says, this guy's probably not human. He's probably not actually human. He's probably one of those weird looking hybrids that they cooked up in a lab somewhere. We can kill this guy and it won't really matter. But this guy is like, no, I'm definitely human. And one of the laws of Krakoa is you can't kill humans unless your own personal life is in danger. This guy's begging for his life. And so ultimately, she basically ends up sparing this guy. And initially you have Beast who does a bit of an interrogation here, kind of asking a few questions and saying like, who are you working for? What's the whole deal? The guy starts sobbing, telling the story about like his dog and how his dog's at home. Somebody needs to go check on him, that kind of a thing. But the torture methods of Krakoa are not inhumane, but they are somewhat brutal, right? Depending on how you perceive it, right? Where he kind of spills this story to Beast and says, like, we just get our orders from the top, right? Like, this wasn't any kind of a political maneuver. It wasn't a political job. It wasn't like a hit job or anything. It was designed to be a heist. The response of Beast is, well, one, you guys killed Xavier, so how much of a heist could it possibly be? And then two, you attacked a political nation that's new to the world in the face of the world being afraid of it. How could this be anything but political? Enter Jean Grey, who uses her powers and basically starts to, attack this guy's mind. And that's where that kind of violation begins to come in, right? Like reading this guy's mind in a way where he can't legitimately fight back, but at the same time, he also kind of asked for it. And so that's when we end up finding out that this mysterious guy that we saw at the end of like the first and second issues is the guy this thief is basically working for, right? That they get their orders from this guy. He doesn't know their name. The whole purpose was for them to go into Krakoa, to steal some stuff, to go into that facility, steal some stuff there, and then we're going to sell it to these guys, right? Part of it was, we're paying you for this heist, and then you're going to bring these different, these goods and so on to us, but they don't know the guy's name, right? All they know is he has like a peacock tattoo, and that's it. They don't know his name, they don't know what his face looks like, or any of that stuff, right? They simply just know this guy is there somewhere. But from here, we pick up with the final mission of X-Force in this first part of the story, and we end up joining in what's basically a place called Terra Verde. And Terra Verde is a nation that's looking to sign a treaty with Krakoa for, in order to access those various Krakoan seeds that Xavier has at his disposal. But the idea behind Terra Verde, and this is kind of important here, the idea behind Terra Verde is that they were at one point the world leader in what was called telefloronics. And telefloronics was basically it's kind of this weird wonky word to describe the idea of creating a means of healing people, to create what are essentially nanobots, right? So super microscopic machines that were not really machines, but were plant-based in origin. And these could be used for a number of healing factors and different things like that to heal injuries and so on. The problem with this is that while they were leading the world with this kind of research, it was still pretty far off from being something that could, one, include human trials, and then two, be mass marketed and then controlled and so on and so forth. But the relative early days of their experiments, relatively recently, you suddenly had Xavier who popped up with Krakoan seeds on Krakoa. And so basically all this technology vanished, right? Like any funding they had just disappeared overnight. But within Terra Verde itself, you also had a guy named President Como. And this was a guy who basically kind of stabilized the region, stabilized this country, which had been warring for quite some time. And so it was really pushing towards more of a plant-based society. But the funny thing about this is that with this treaty being signed, you end up having, of course, Black Tom Cassidy, who attends with Charles Xavier in order to keep him protected, right? Since Black Tom Cassidy can control the Earth. And so you end up having these guys who show up and start kind of manifesting these tendrils of sorts and immediately start going after President Como. And with that happening, you have Black Tom Cassidy who kind of implements his power that seems to kind of shut these down when you have the attack going after the president himself. Black Tom Cassidy, of course, saves Xavier, is also able to kind of stave off the attack from the invaders, which largely happens off panel. We don't really see that. All we really get is the statement of Black Tom Cassidy in the sense that like they basically ran away, right? They seem to get scared and sort of flee. But the response of Beast is, if these guys are going to be brave enough to launch an attack against the president as well as Xavier at the same time, then why just run, right? That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And so Beast's response, you really tell Sage, go back and pull up all the information that you can and all the camera feeds that you can of this whole thing, right? Like Kokam, the president himself, has gone through a whole bunch of different attempts to remove him from power over the years, but somehow this seems a little bit different. And so what you end up finding out here is that the attack itself was not designed to go after President Kokam, it was designed to go after his son, which is the smartest move to make. If you're going to try to control the president, take his son. And any president, anybody who's worth a damn will do whatever it takes to keep their kid alive, right? Unless their kid's really just that far of a lost cause. And so ultimately, when he came out and said he's not going to sign the treaty in the aftermath of this incident, the immediate response of Beast and all them is, okay, it's because they have his son, right? It's because they took his son and they're forcing his hand. And so what you end up getting is basically Beast and Jean Grey and them who show up on the doorstep of President Kokam and don't really have any intent of harming him. Instead, Jean reads his mind and says, okay, tell us everything you know. What we end up finding out is that these weird looking wonky guys with these tendrils are basically telefloronic scientists who were taken over by their own experiments. Now, the indication here seems to be that these experiments are almost kind of like Venom in nature, in the sense that somewhere along the line they developed some kind of sentience and then basically became hostile in and of themselves. They kind of became parasitic and basically latched themselves to these guys. The other part of this is that if these beings really are operating in the realm of self-preservation, then it wouldn't be that far out of the realm of possibility to create the argument that with research drying up, that there was no more attempts by this group to create these guys. More so than that, the research was probably being killed off. And so it was these telefloronics basically being killed off themselves. This is really seeming more of an act of self-preservation than anything else. But regardless of how you try to slice it, the response of Beast is, we have to go basically launch this strike against these guys. The other part of this, and this is really more heavy-handed by Beast, is to say that in his mind, telefloronics are a massive, credible threat to the mutant population. And the reason reason for that is if telefloronics are a kind of organism that exists out there and it bonds itself to people, then it can bond itself to almost anything else. More so than that, if it bonded itself to these guys and they started evolving over time, then what would happen if we had a telefloronic who's powerful enough to reach into the world and control it? Then at that point, you have a being that could basically go after the mutant population by targeting their own island, meaning humans or mutants would have to like take to the skies in order to escape, the surface. They can never go back to the surface world again. But it basically creates a scenario where the mutant population could legitimately stand on the realm of complete and total eradication, right? Because at that point, then suddenly this being could start producing different kinds of pheromones or producing different kinds of substances from plants that specifically target mutants, and then basically make the entire atmosphere of the earth poison for the mutant population, and it would kill them. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. It's far-fetched, but the idea of Beast is it's not that far-fetched, right? That's really his biggest fear. Like this kind of hybrid fusion between these plants and these humans. These human beings could lead to some kind of future version of these, telefloronic beings that could basically turn the entire weapon or the entire Earth into a weapon against the mutant population and then wipe them out, right? The entire population would go extinct. And so the response of Beast is do what you have to do, right? We cannot leave behind any witnesses, and we can't leave these things behind. Kill them all. And that's the crazy thing, is because the response of Beast is they're not really human, right? When Jean asked the question, what happened to kill no human? The response of Beast is they're not really human beings in the first place. Not anymore. They're like Omega Sentinels. They're more machine than man, right? Twisted and evil, consumed by the dark side. But that's basically what they are, right? And so Jean basically eradicates these things using her powers, and then they basically start going after and attempting to find the son of President Kokam. And once they locate his son, they end up finding out that he's a telefloronic himself, and that he is one of the individuals out here who's trying to bring down his father, right? The whole thing was staged. It was all planned by him. He staged his own kidnapping to force his father's hand. The idea behind this is that it wasn't really as though it was like an acquisition of money or power or anything like that. I mean, it was to a degree, but the whole stance of the president's son is that with Terra Verde being on the verge of telefloronic breakthroughs, that if they had succeeded, it would have put him at the forefront of everything, right? They would have been like the Wakanda of the healing world. Everybody would have come to them, right? From the pharmaceutical standpoint, everybody would have come to them, and it would have taken them from a small little nation that barely just achieved stability to being like the center of the pharmaceutical world. The other crazy thing that comes out of this is that Beast kind of looks at the situation and says that had this technology gotten out there, right? Had telefloronics gotten out there, that humanity would have realized there was an alternative to cocoa medicine, and that they would no longer recognize mutant sovereignty. If that was the case, then in turn, it would have caused massive problems for the mutant population. And so in an act of maintaining the mutant population's stance as to where they are in terms of maintaining their power, you end up having Beast basically wipe this guy's mind. Like, and not even in the sense of him just like wiping his memories, but in the sense of him basically kind of recoding the telefloronic substance in his body to essentially eat his mind alive. And all it does is just kind of leave him in a feeble state, right? It leaves him in a vegetative state, and it leaves his father there. It's like, your son's here, albeit, Beast basically saying like, which of these was the two evils, right? To kill this guy's son, or to tell him his son was a traitor. Which of these were the two right things to do? Keep in mind, Xavier was behind this as well. And that's kind of the nature of these things, right? It's what had to be done in order for the mutant population to maintain its role in the world and to achieve its level of power. And so what you end up finding out here is that this kind of telefloronic substance inside the body of the president is actually sentient, right? That he's wholly telefloronic, not just in terms of it impacting his body or anything, but just on the biological level. It is merged with him in its entirety. He's not just wielding it as a weapon, right? Like, he is this. And so basically it kind of breaks down and literally leaves the hospital room and then reforms itself. Okay, so from here we jump to the next part of the story, and this is one of the things about Benjamin Percy's X-Force run. Benjamin Percy is a good writer, but the biggest issue with his X-Force run is it just kind of feels like it's all over the place. The idea here is that we kind of jump back a little bit. There were a couple things going on with the idea of Domino. Honestly, in order to keep things simple, we can largely skim over it. Basically, like, Domino ended up enlisting the help of Colossus, who had kind of left Krakoa and the X-Men for the Savage Land in the aftermath of everything that was going on, in the sense of his attack when he was in Russia, I think it was, and helping to liberate people, the injuries he suffered. They ended up, of course, finding out that the reason why Domino's portions of her skin were being removed is that because this kind of secretive organization that existed out there basically served the purpose of trying to create more versions of her for whatever their goals happened to be. Ultimately, Colossus kind of jumped in front of like a moving train, which was their base, or at least part of their base of operations where their research was. The train was destroyed, all the samples on the train were destroyed, and Domino ended up dying, and of course they resurrected her from the dead, and then Colossus went back to doing his thing. And that's basically it, right? That's basically all that happened in that little segment. By no means does any of that overly important, right? And it's kind of weird, but the X-Force team is kind of sent on another mission by Beast. But this one's kind of a follow-up to the events of Terra Verde, where basically this Terra Floronic that had escaped President Kokum's son, kind of going out and manifesting on its own, has basically taken over the country on its own, right? Taken over the country in its entirety. Now, the fact that Beast was the one who made that call and did those things and kind of screwed up that guy's mind and all that leads him to kind of running this mission on his own, right? So it's him, and he's the one basically talking to Quentin Quire, to Wolverine, and to Domino. Now, this is kind of a big deal because the entire nature of X-Force, because it is so clandestine, relies heavily on trust. That you trust the guy next to you to keep your back, and you trust that the people who are giving your orders aren't sending you into like sending you on a suicide mission. And they have trust in Beast that Beast is not going to get them killed. But Beast is in a lot of ways trying to cover his own tracks here. That when he kind of sends them in there, that it's like, okay, I need to know what's going on, right? I need to know everything that's going on inside there, and I need you guys to meet with the president. And the problem with this is that with President Kokom, he's dead, right? Like he was literally taken over by these plants and kind of bonded to a wall. It's a pretty screwed up way. The other thing here is that with these, with the whole country basically being taken over in such a rapid amount of time, it shows us, one, what these telefloronics are capable of, in the sense that Beast was right with their ability to tap into Earth and then manipulate it for their own ends, and that two, they have no regards in killing people. Like this is basically a dead country. Beast killed everybody here, and Beast is kind of trying to keep things quiet. The other part of this is that it's kind of formed its own kind of society in a lot of ways, and this is like its own kind of plant life. You have what looks like basically a kind of leopard or a tiger or whatever it is that kind of like manifests out of the ground, right? And then just kind of starts going after them, sort of walks into the temple where all this seems to sort of be emanating from, which looks like the base of operations for these guys. The other thing that kind of goes on here is Black Tom Cassidy has had a kind of existential crisis, right? He's trying to be a good guy, not been doing very good at it, trying to turn over a new leaf, turning to alcohol in a lot of ways to kind of get himself put together. Beast ends up kind of enlisting his aid and saying like, we need you here. And with Black Tom being hungover, Beast ends up just basically taking him and saying like, we're going to get you sober and we're going to get you out there into the field. This is your lucky day. You want to be a hero? Go out there with X-Force and go be a hero, right? Like go fight the good fight. The other thing that goes on here is you have Quentin Quire, who tries to chime into Beast and telling him like, this whole nation is a living organism now and has killed everybody here and is taking us out. And it grabs Quentin Quire and then snatches him off. Now, once Quentin Quire's pulled in, you end up having Wolverine and you have Domino, who basically follow him in there. And of course, Quentin Quire just kind of responds to them with like telekinetic weapons and different things like that. But he's got like a bandana tied around his head, right? So like, he looks kind of cool. But once they're in here, there's a couple things that go down. One is that this plant life looks like it's been growing for eons, right? Like it's been growing for centuries. That's kind of the statement that's given. It's Wolverine who kind of gives it. So what it looks like is that these things have been growing for quite some time. This kind of landscape's been here for a while. There's some sort of kind of toying with the idea that this is how the telefloronics were basically engineered, by using organic, like living plant life that existed out there in that temple, and then kind of bringing it to the world and then trying to engineer it. So basically like they tapped into what were basically like evil plants, for lack of a better word, and now they're pissed. That kind of seems to be the case. The other part of this, and something that I would say is probably the most knowledgeable, or probably the most reasonable, is that the plants really have existed here for quite some time. And in fact, Benjamin Percy basically tells us as much, but there was a kind of balance of nature that existed here, right? That you had the plant life that was there, and presumably over time it would feed on people, but it was a kind of balance in this sort of ecosystem. But that with Beast basically tapping into this, well, really not even just Beast and the attempts to utilize telefloronics, for their own purpose, that they created a kind of imbalance. That with Beast cracking the code of the telefloronics and then trying to find a way to engineer it for his own end, literally playing Dr. Frankenstein with this kind of plant life he didn't know anything about, that he shifted the balance of power. And that what it's done is it's made the plant life more, like really kind of elevated it, right? So it's kind of taken on the form and become more human-like and elevated it above its post, right? So basically it's kind of achieved a new level of power. And so that means that that's how it was able to kind of take over the entirety of the nation. And that answers the question why it never did that before. Presumably because it never occurred to this plant life, or this plant life wasn't previously capable of that. But whatever the case is, Beast literally altered it in such a way to where he changed its genetic structure and made it something wholly evil. Well, not really evil, but something just wholly twisted, and kind of moved it up along the food chain. And so with that being the case, you have Wolverine and you have Quentin Quire, who are both snatched up, right? They're both basically taken away. And what these telefloronics are doing is basically basically consuming humans, right? Consuming organic matter and then like literally eating it for, and kind of forming their own society in that way. It's kind of interesting here because Wolverine's one of the ones they take. They already took Quentin Quire. They already kind of sacrificed and consumed him, right? So he's kind of being converted basically into plant life, and Wolverine's kind of undergoing that conversion process. The real kicker here is whether or not Wolverine's healing factor can overcome that. And it kind of seems like to a degree it can, but it's not something that works against his healing factor, right? It's not considered to be a kind of invasive, pathogen that his healing factor would immediately attack, right? It's not like a cold or a flu or something along those lines. What it does is it modifies their body on the genetic level. And for the most part, that kind of seems to sort of operate under the purview of his healing factor, and his healing factor just doesn't really seem to notice it, right? And so either that or his healing factor doesn't know what to do with it, so it does nothing. But whatever the case is, it basically points to the idea that Wolverine is susceptible to this and could be taken over just like everybody else. Now, the other thing that goes on here is Jean Grey realizes what was happening, that with Beast basically leaving her and Sage in the dark, not really even telling them this mission was going on in the first place, that Jean had basically probed his mind and realized what was happening. And that's when she shows up here. And she's like, you basically lied to everybody. You engineer this whole circumstance, one, just to see what could happen. Two, you're trying to find a way to bring this place into Krakoa to use it for our own ends. Like, you're making the argument the ends justify the means, but the reality, Beast, is that you killed a whole country. You killed an entire nation of people. So yeah, like, sure, what they were doing would have put Krakoa at risk in terms of our place in the political and social hierarchy of the world, right? It would have possibly slid us down the pole in terms of our ability to maintain our dominant place, with the various medicines and stuff that we have, but you sacrifice a whole nation of people to do it. And we as people, like we as mutants, have to be better than that. We cannot adopt this philosophy that the ends justify the means, but the reality is that it does, right? The ends really do justify the means, because the stance that Jean seems to be taking here is that if Beast had done nothing and kind of allowed things to unfold, then everything the mutant population had worked for would have failed. In her desire to do the right thing, she would have killed their success, right? And at the end of the day, that cannot be allowed to happen, right? That cannot be allowed to take place. That mutants have struggled long enough, that because of her caring and her cold-hearted nature, she'd killed everything they worked for. And at the end of the day, Beast is like, no, like we're not playing that game, right? We're not doing that, right? I did what I did. I make no apologies for it. And yes, I sacrificed a whole nation of people, but what's this nation of, 100,000 people in comparison to the millions of mutants that will be here over time, right? Through just procreation and so on, and the mutants who are here right now, right? Basically, the argument Beast makes is our need is greater than theirs, and the experiment is worth the loss, right? And it's a legitimate statement, and it's an accurate statement to make, right? It is. It really is worth the loss. And so because of that, of course, again, Quentin Quire, he's dead. Wolverine kind of ends up popping up and manages to make some measure of an attack, but even then he starts to be overcome by these vines again, and that's when you end up having Jean Grey kind of working together alongside Sage, with Sage kind of analyzing this, taking the information of Beast and realizing how all this is, how their entire genetic structure, for lack of a better word, how that works. The response to Jean is we can combine our powers, right? We can basically use the power of Sage, like her mind, and we can use the power of Jean herself to kind of anchor everybody together, and the power of Black Tom Cassidy to essentially introduce a kind of virus into their genetic code. Effectively, they give the plant life cancer and break it down and kill the plant life at a rapid state. That's all it is, right? Just mutated cells, right? Free radicals, right? But in response to all that, with everything that's happened and this whole conflict, ending pretty fast, Jean Grey quits, right? Because her whole stance is X-Force is supposed to exist on a basis of trust, but Wolverine kind of calls her on it, right? And says, like, you were never really meant for this, right? Like, the nature of X-Force isn't to be this kind of altruistic group that does good things because it's the right thing to do. The whole purpose of X-Force is to be as bad as the bad guys, right? Because that's how you win. You win by becoming as bad as they are. That's just what you have to do in order to win. Now, there's no arguing that point. Jean is too kind for that. And so she can't be with X-Force because she can't really do what needs to be done. The other thing that kind of goes on here is she's sharing a bath with Wolverine. It's good to see that the whole kind of love triangle between Jean Grey and Cyclops and Wolverine is still there, right? That's a cornerstone of their character. But the whole thing about this is it kind of switches over to a degree, in that in the aftermath of all this, that you kind of have autopsies that are done on the various bodies that were taken. And what you end up finding out here is that what these telefloronics had done was actually managed to achieve the exact same process as Krakoan technology, in the sense that when you have Dr. Reyes who goes to cut one of them open and perform a kind of autopsy, this smaller body jumps out, cuts your throat, and takes off. What telefloronics have managed to do is find a way to resurrect themselves. That's basically what they've done here, right? That in the event that the main person dies, right? So say you're infected by one of these telefloronics, you basically become wholly that plant life, right? You lose your own real identity here. But in the event that you die, what would happen is you would basically kind of reconstitute yourself inside your own corpse and then emerge at some future point in time, right? Almost like a butterfly out of a cocoon, except, you know, not really pretty, like pretty ugly and nasty looking. But that's what happens across the board here, right? It's very similar to the xenomorphs from the Alien stories, but they kind of start popping up out of all these corpses, right? Just kind of popping up all over the place. And that's when things start, you know, sort of pop off, because from their perspective, they do what is inherently in their nature, which is to spread across Krakoa, right? So it's the events of Beast kind of getting continually worse. Now, the other part of this is you have Domino, who shows up to Colossus. And for the most part, for the character of Colossus, with him being out, right? With him being in the Savage Land down in Antarctica and being out and away from Krakoa, that he's at a place of peace. He's removed from all of this, right? He's removed from everything. He wants to be left alone. And so when Domino shows up and asks him to come back, his response is no. Like, I began as a farmer. I'm going to stay here as a farmer. I'm just going to enjoy this time that I have. Go away and leave me alone. I don't want to be part of this whole X-Men thing that you guys have anymore. The problem with this is that as things begin to pop off in Krakoa, the various Madroxes that that Colossus had on his farm, who were basically farmhands, immediately start bolting towards the gate of Krakoa. And that's when Colossus realizes something's going on here, right? And so of course he basically, you know, activates his osmium skin and goes taking off towards the gates as well, leaving what looks like his girlfriend Kayla behind, or his sister or something like that. I don't think we're really given a whole lot of information about this character, but he basically leaves her behind. And when he gets in there, everything's popping off. This sentient island is literally going nuts, right? Like, these little things are like little evil pixies, right? They're like running around with these little guns. They got little knives, stabbing the hell out of people. And these things are maybe like 2 feet tall, but they're causing all kinds of havoc on this place, right? Like just little evil pixies, just ripping the whole place up. Now, of course, this leads to Black Tom Cassidy showing up to Xavier and basically saying like, we're locking you away, right? So it's like taking the president to a bunker. While that's happening, one of these little guys manages to kind of sneak away and basically accesses one of the swords from Swords of X, right? From basically accesses the Cerebro sword. And so he effectively takes off with it. And then from there, like, Colossus shows up, helps to overcome this great big huge thing, kind of saves the day, and then leaves, right? It's just like, I'm done, right? And, you know, and that's the crazy thing is you kind of have this sort of conversation between you know, Domino and Colossus, where he's like, after I'm done with this, like, do not come back and find me. That's kind of thing. They had a little bit of a romance to a degree, but now he's done, right? He's done with her, he's done with the X-Men, the whole 9 yards, you know, and he's like, do not come and find me, right? Like, do not come back, leave me alone. And so he basically just ends up leaving, right? He just ends up kind of going off and doing his own thing. Switch over to Quentin Quire, right? Quentin Quire is kind of making out with Sophie from the Stepford Cuckoos. It's good to see that he got one of those girls. Or the funny thing is, as soon as that happens, he's immediately stabbed, and then he's knocked through the portal by one of the guys. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people who are fans of Quentin Quire, right, like all 30 of them, they'd probably be pretty pissed off that Quentin Quire is being killed and kind of thrown away like this. Honestly, I'm a fan of Quentin Quire, but I'm biding my time, because here's the thing. I feel like Quentin's gonna have this ridiculously OP moment, right? I feel like it's kind of slapping him around a little bit and then just giving him this ridiculously amazing moment later on down the line. Because remember, he's an Omega level telepath, right? He's not easy pickings. But when he's knocked through here, he's immediately met by the arrival of Mikhail Rasputin, right? The brother of Colossus. And we end up finding out that the brother of Colossus is the one who's leading this whole secretive organization, or at least involved in this whole secretive organization. Now, Mikhail Rasputin is strange because Marvel has never fully fleshed out what his powers are. We know that he can kind of transmute matter on different levels, but it happens in different ways, right? He can travel through time and space, or he can like change a person's body structure, right? To change them into something else. It's one of these things where it's kind of like matter manipulation, but only as it pertains to like another person's physical body and like his ability to move through time and space. But it's one of these things where Marvel kind of keeps him in kind of this gray area where it's like, could he become a reality manipulator, or is he kind of confined to this thing? We don't really know, because we don't really care, because we've never taken the time to tell you. Like, that's kind of what it is. That's kind of what's going on with this character. But regardless, he ends up dragging him into what looks like the Kremlin, right? So like the capital of the Russian government. And that's when you get this sort of switch over where the main henchman, right, of this guy, of you know, the leader, who was at one point defeated by, you know, the Xeno group, basically, who was defeated by Mikhail Rasputin, is basically brought back, right? He's kind of resurrected. He doesn't really matter. It's not really a major talking point. He's kind of enhanced a little bit, right? Like each time he dies, there's modifications that are made to him to improve on the way, you know, to improve on him, so he doesn't die that same way again, before, that he can stand a better chance. But as soon as Mikhail Rasputin walks in here, like, one, he's been attending all these meetings. They've been holding this meeting from Mikhail Rasputin, right? So they kept it hidden. And then in turn, you also have like Omega Red, who's on Krakoa as well, right? Kind of a quick little thing. But like this big attack kind of happens, this kind of big assault happens between Mikhail and this henchman guy. This henchman guy is overcome pretty easily. But the important thing that kind of comes out of this is that one, Mikhail Rasputin turns into stone and destroys him. And then two, you have this conversation where because it's Mikhail Rasputin and because the X-Men learn about this, that Beast goes after Colossus again and then brings Colossus back to the island. But what's happened is Beast seems to have kind of told everybody what was going on. And that pisses off Wolverine, who basically attacks Beast. And it's just kind of like, dude, you dick. He chases everybody out of there and they end up taking Colossus to kind of a sort of, not really an interrogation space, kind of an interrogation space, but basically says like, look, we have some questions that we need to ask you about your brother Mikhail and about everything you can tell us, right? Like what you can tell us about him, his involvement, your familial ties, what it is that he's doing here. The important thing is that we kind of get an answer from Benjamin Percy on this, that Mikhail Rasputin basically hands this weapon over to the head of Xeno and says, look, the time has come for you guys to accept the way things are. For the longest time, you and the various organizations who have existed out there, the ones that came before you, have fought against mutant kind on your own. You fought against the mutant population by yourself, but that doesn't work, right? You've built me an army, you've given me everything that I needed, but my resources are also now your resources. If we are going to take down the mutant population, we have to work together. You have to accept help from mutant kind. And so what this means is the brother of Colossus has allied himself with an organization that seeks the purpose of bringing down the X-Men. It's crazy. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace. Thank you.